For taking the time to join us today for the second in Bushfire Recovery Victoria's series of mental health and wellbeing webinars presented by Dr. Rob Gordon. My name is Angela Whitworth and I work in the Community Engagement and Advancement team at BRV. So before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we work on and are meeting from today, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. I also acknowledge any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So we will be recording this webinar and the recording will be made available later on the BRV Facebook page. So I asked you to please keep yourself on mute as Rob talks, and there will be opportunities at various points during the webinar to discuss his presentation. Please use the chat box to ask questions, or you can raise your hand using the raised hand function in the participants list, or you can put your thumbs up or give a clap. So our presenter, Dr. Rob Gordon, is a clinical psychologist, an expert in mental health first aid and supporting people affected by bushfires. He has been working alongside BRV, providing advice and sessions like this one for bushfire affected people and communities. Today, Rob is presenting on parenting and family life after a bushfire, and he will discuss support for children and young people, parenting, family life and school disruptions, and group supervision for youth. So I'll hand over to you, Rob.
Oh, thanks, Angela. Good morning, everyone. Here we are in the doldrums, 6-8 months down the track, winter, cold. It's a time of great stress, usually. People are very tired after bushfires. Hopefully most of the blocks have been cleared by now. So people are starting to try and look forward. What I want to do is just share with you some of the observations that I've made over the years, and I guess draw together some of the things that are in a way obvious, but which we lose track of when we're in the midst of a highly stressed situation. We got 2 hours together, so what I propose to do is talk for a while and then maybe see if anyone's got any questions. And I think if we manage it carefully, we can ask them out loud or put them in the chat function. And maybe even in the middle of it, we can take 5 minutes out if we need to get a drink or something. But look, the really important thing we need to hang on to is that we have just some really major issues that come out of disasters. Of course, we have the trauma, but the trauma is the threat, the disturbing experience we had on the day. A small number of people keep getting bothered by that, and they go straight into post-traumatic stress. They're frightened, can't sleep, agitated, and so on. But what we actually find is that most people manage to push that aside and do what they have to do. When we come to children and teenagers, many of them also put it to the side. Now, what we learn is that getting it out of your mind and putting it aside doesn't necessarily resolve it. For some people, they can put it aside and it doesn't matter. So that one of the things we need to keep track of is, what shall we call it, the imprint of the experience of the event. The smoke, the fire, the turmoil, the loss of contact with people, the disruptive effects of evacuation, all of the sensory features of the fire, all of these things, anything that's to do with what happened on the day or the days around. And we know from the Beyond Bushfires research how disturbing it is to actually lose contact with your loved ones without knowing what's happened to them. This is disturbing for children, disturbing for adults. So the first thing we can do is keep track of what's happening to the imprint of the experience, bearing in mind that such things can submerge and then surface again at various times. I want to speak a bit about what's going on there. So we shouldn't think just because the kids are no longer talking about fires that it's resolved. We should understand that big events have to be processed over time for all of us, and that there are aspects of that experience that we won't understand until we go through the next hot summer, maybe even encounter the next bushfire and so on. So we have to have a situation where the kids are ready to communicate to us what's coming up for them, so we can keep working with it. The second one is the impact of whatever kind of losses they incurred from it. And of course, the big ones are the loss of pets, animals, hopefully not too often loved ones, but sometimes, but house, property, but also friendship groups, neighbours, environment. Anything that's lost is a loss. And the loss of something that's emotionally important to us creates feelings of sadness. And the more important the losses are, the more significant that sadness is. And we know that if the losses are really important, then it impacts on our whole sense of self. Am I still the same person when I've lost my house? Some people say their house is a really important part of their sense of who they are. And they have a real sense of, I'm just not the same complicated, rich person that I used to be. I feel diminished in some way. Or the farm, or the business, or whatever it might be. And I think the same thing happens for children. I'd like to emphasise the importance of friends, close friends. Most children probably have maybe 2 or 3 close friends, sometimes only one. One close friend is enough to support your sense of being a valued and good person. You just need one person whose face lights up when you arrive at school regularly, who you know you can go and talk to at lunchtime, who you can have fun with. One's enough. 3's even better. And then around that, children and us adults need to feel we're part of a group. They might not be close friends, but that's a group, you know, I know where to find them at lunchtime. I go and hang out and eat my lunch with them. That sense of belonging to a group is a really important feature. And therefore, the loss of friends becomes important, the loss through the disruption of they move away, they go to a different school, and so on. Yeah, can you remember? I can remember at school, when I was at school, how I couldn't imagine how I was going to get through the next year when I found out my friend was going to be in a different class. He was still going to be at the same school, but in a different class. And suddenly the year looked bleak and difficult and painful. We've got to remember what an emotional resource friends are. We don't have to do anything with them. We just have to be with them. And I think that's really important, even going down the track earlier. I've worked with a number of people that I've seen, usually in their young adulthood. I remember one young man who was a really eccentric, odd fellow that didn't get on very well with anyone, and he couldn't understand it. He would talk to someone and he'd be very pleased to meet someone at university, and then he noticed that the next time he saw them walking towards him down the road, and his face would light up and he'd be looking forward to talking to them, and blow me down, they'd cross the road and go on the other side, and they'd avoid him. Once they'd had one conversation, they didn't want to have another. And of course, it was obvious to me because he as soon as he started talking, he just held forth and gave lectures with great authority on everything. His story was that he made 3 very close friends in grade 1, and they just absolutely spent their whole time together. And for 3 completely independent reasons that had nothing to do with him, they all left at the end of that year. I think one went interstate and one moved to another school and one went overseas, other families. And he lost these friends. And he said he never made another friend through school. And he would just wander around all by himself every lunchtime. And of course, you know, he'd think about things. He didn't have that process of learning how to meld himself in with other people. And you can find this in other reports, that I think we really need to remember how important friendships are, even for preschool kids. And there's quite a bit of evidence on this if we look for it. So the continuity, the continuing of relationships is really important. Even if we have to, if people move away, if we have to contrive opportunities for the kids to, you know, chat to each other on the phone every few weeks or something, just to keep something in touch while they then hopefully under the shadow of that relationship they make some new friends. So that's an aspect of loss that I want to emphasise. And of course, with COVID isolation in Victoria, this is a really important issue that we need to try and keep track of what that isolation is doing for the kids, and especially the young children. Do they talk about it? And what can we organise? Anything is better than nothing, you know, a Zoom connection. They can't play games together, but they can have a bit of a chat and maybe share some stuff and so on. But the third point I want to emphasise is this element of disruption to life. What age does friendship become so important for children? As soon as they make the friends, I would say, even earlier. You know, when young families have children together and they meet together and the kids mix, those little babies start to recognise that one there is the same as me. He's the only one that's the same as me, crawling around on the floor. And they become important. So, you know, that's really important. I'll talk about friendship and the peer group in adolescence. That's a bit more complicated, but the disruption. You know, we live our lives in ordered routines, patterns that we establish and we shape and cultivate so that they hold and maintain what's really important to us, the values, that we regularly make time to be with the people we love, that we regularly make time in our routines to do the things that are important to us, to help the kids with the homework or whatever. And when we get a routine going, it becomes a pattern that we don't have to think about. It just holds itself together. Routines become a really important stabilising framework for our lives. And if they work, we don't think about them. This is an interesting thing, that there is a lot that supports our life that if it works, we don't give any attention to. It frees us up to focus attention on the problems. It's exactly the same with the kids. We know that when you have very young children, you know, and you go out and you have dinner with friends and you stay out late and you get home late with the kids and they don't get to bed early, and it takes them 3 days to settle them all down again, or it did with mine. They're irritable and scrotchy because they don't have much sleep, and the next day's a write-off and so on. But it shows us how our emotional state is really maintained by this regularity of routine. And as we, I don't need to talk about all the complications of life in a disaster-affected community, but there are so many things that disrupt the routines, and we can't keep them going, even if we're not in a temporary accommodation and so on, living in clothes that aren't our familiar clothes and so on. Even if we haven't got that, in many ways life is disrupted. I think it's a really important thing for the kids to just try to keep track of the routines you had when life was working better. And when we get very stressed and we move into this sort of attempt to sort of survive the stress in whatever way we can, we make compromises and take shortcuts and drop things off. And therefore, we lose a lot of the structures that enable us to do the things that give our life quality and value. Just hang out with the kids and spend time with them, and just communicating with our partners, and all these things that happen when you feel you've got more time. So the stress, the isolation is a major disruptive problem. That we've just, people working at home. When you get into that situation, you've lost your routine, you have to improvise everything. And you improvise it on the basis of, how do I get through today? And then we throw into it the two great factors of uncertainty. There's so much we're uncertain about, and novelty. Novelty. We're dealing with new things, new problems. These are major problems with COVID problem, and all of this creates a sort of background of you could say insecurity and anxiety. Anxiety is just that vague sense of uncomfortable. It's not exactly fear, but I just don't feel confident. I feel worried. I feel ill at ease. When I'm in that state, everything is harder to deal with. And I think if we see this as the environment of the mid-year after the disaster, the mid-year when things have settled to a certain degree, but you actually found a pattern for life. But the question is, what is still there and what's been lost? So most people, when they get very tired around the middle of the year, get tired not tired in the sense of the muscular fatigue we get when we've been working the garden all day or something like that. It's a different sort of fatigue. It's a fatigue in a different energy system. It's the energy system that is our sort of buffer, the energy system that we draw on under stress. It's exactly the same for the kids. All we've got to do is put kids in unusual, uncomfortable, unpredictable situations, and they're in stress mode. And when we're in stress mode for a length of time, you could say, to put it simplistically, we draw the energy we need from within ourselves. We're drawing on, like, we're using up our overdraft. We're building an overdraft in our bodies and minds. And this is where the idea of coping comes in. Most people, even kids, try to cope as best they can. And when we cope, we try to shut down the normal system that tells us, I'm tired, I need to rest, I need some fun, I'm unhappy, I want to talk to people. But when we've got constant stresses, we can't actually do that. We can't stop working, we can't rest, we don't feel relaxed. I can't talk to mum and dad because they're bad-tempered, or I don't want to upset them, or, all sorts of things. Because we've got to remember that kids are thinking all the time. Do you remember, just try to remember back, do you remember having things going on in your mind that you never told your parents about? Do you remember having worries at school and coming home and you're really worried about some interaction you had? Or was it the girl that you really fancied hadn't been interested in the book you brought to school, especially to show her the pictures of? I remember being brokenhearted. My favourite book, and I took it to school. She wasn't the slightest bit interested in it. I didn't go home and tell my mum. I just went home feeling really sad. This was probably in about grade 2, but I still remember. Remember how much is going on in the minds of kids that they don't tell us about. They cope. And then, what do they do when we have a fight with our partner? An argument, a disagreement. They just sit there, don't they? They don't know what to say. They just sit there. But they don't even perhaps know what to think. Of course, if we do it every 2 or 3 days, they roll their eyes and say, there they go again. But they worry about it. And so, we've got to try and move out of our adult perspective and just remember our own childhood. I think it's really refreshing because coping always has a cost. And the cost is, on the one hand, we can get control of things. So we can get control of the trauma by blocking it out of my mind. I just don't think about it. And, my clinical work at the Children's Hospital, you talk to kids, and some kids have got very good strategies in their mind. They've learned, no, I just don't think about it. I always go and play or do this when the worrying thoughts come up. And other kids don't know what to do, and they'll run to their mums. They probably won't always have the words to explain what they're worried about, but they'll, pull at your skirt and say, Mummy, I'm bored, can you do something with me? No, I haven't got time, you run off and play. No, I don't know what to do. What they're really saying is, Mum, I can't draw any resources out of myself because I'm actually haven't got the resources to put disturbing thoughts. I need a bit of input from somebody else to help put it aside. And often we have to sort of learn to translate what the kids are saying and just take the gesture. They're may be very inconvenient for us, but they're demanding some attention, because I notice that people often use attention seeking as a diagnosis and an explanation for what the problem is. I don't think attention seeking gets us anywhere. We've got to ask, what attention are they seeking and why do they need it? That's really where we start to tune in. People only seek attention because they need it. And parental attention is a really important lifeblood for young children. I'm old enough to remember when we all had one single black Bakelite telephone in the hall with a stool beside it. Do you remember those days? Some of you are old enough to remember that. And my mum used to have an Auntie Doris who used to ring her up every morning. Now, I'd be playing happily until Auntie Doris rang up. And as soon as my mum was totally ensconced, I couldn't play. I'd have to go and sit beside the stool. This was probably when I was a little child before I went to school. And as soon as I was sitting there, their conversation was so incredibly boring. There was nothing in it to interest me. So I'd get restless and impatient, and I'd sort of start disrupting the conversation. And, it's that, and I remember it as a parent, the kids would be playing happily, and then you think, fantastic, I'll go and do something. Or I'll start reading a book or whatever. And as soon as you do that, somehow they need your attention. They'll have a fight, or they'll come and ask you questions or whatever. I think we need to recognise how just giving your attention to children bathes them in a sort of an atmosphere of security and so on. And these are very simple things. We lose them when we're stressed, tired, exhausted, overwrought, worried. And there's a great popularity of strategies. I always get asked for strategies to solve problems. They're very important and valuable, and we should have lots of them at the back of our mind to roll out. But I think these fundamental human qualities are so essential. They're the foundation for it all. So coping with trauma, coping with adaptation to change, coping with frustrations. There's so many frustrations. You think, now, you know, a lot of kids will sort of feel disappointed and upset about things, and they'll put it down. In a lot of rural and farms and towns, there's a lot of loss of leisure and enjoyment. Life is grim and hard, difficult. There's not much money, you know, and COVID means we can't do a lot of things. So we need to think of the weight of the kids having to cope with this. And the fact that there isn't a problem doesn't mean that the kids aren't using a lot of energy, and there may be times when they can't keep it going. I reckon I use the 80-20 rule that, you know, these business management consultants say things like 20% of the people do 80% of the work and all this sort of thing. But it's very interesting that, you know, probably about 20% of the population and 20% of kids will be struggling with some kind of problems that they probably should have some help for. Not all of them are getting it. And the other 80% seem to be coping with things pretty much on their own. The 20% are already loaded up. So when you get into this coping situation, they haven't got very much, you know, background resources to use. And so the kids that are already coping with a lot of stuff and struggling a bit anyway, maybe they're struggling with their behaviour, or they're struggling with learning problems at school, or they might be struggling with their relationships with other kids or whatever. And so they will tend to actually produce behaviour that shows us there's a problem. And, you know, I think that the first thing we need to do is try to track what's going on in the environment. And I think this applies just as much to teenagers. Well, hang on, what's changed? What's happened? That's the first thing to do. Is there some really basic element in the environment? Have I actually not spent any time with the kids for a while? Or have we not gone for a bike ride for a few weeks? Just very simple things like that. And of course, we need to then attend to their problem. But for the 80% of other kids, they probably have enough resources emotionally to just put it aside and shut it down, but at a cost. So kids will cope as long as they can. Now, we know that when we get down the track to somewhere like now, everyone's very tired. And this might be when problems start to come up, and we don't help the situation by having a simple notion of is this bushfire related or not? They don't seem to be talking about flame and smoke, but they're being very difficult. They won't go to sleep or whatever. I think we need to have this notion of have they might have been a bit surprised that they haven't been more of a problem up to now, which would really be one of the signals that says they've actually been working hard coping, and now they're getting tired. We're all getting tired. When we get tired, we don't have the energy to shut things down. I can't keep it all in my head. And so I get emotional in whatever way I would normally do that. And so, you know, the COVID, for instance, think of the lack of enjoyable input, staying at home, not mixing with your friends, not engaging in hobbies, doing lots more chores. Your life just becomes less rewarding. We've got to remember that enjoyment provides us with a form of energy that we can't replace by other means. We get energy from sleeping and eating, but we get a particular kind of energy from enjoyment. It's a bit like vitamins. We can eat good food, but if we haven't got vitamin D, we get the rickets, don't we? If you don't have vitamin C, you get scurvy. You might be eating lots of other good food, maybe eating too much of it. Remember the old sailors? They'd sail around the world a couple of times eating salt pork and biscuits. They get scurvy. All they needed was a glass of lime juice, and it gave them that ingredient. Wasn't it Captain Cook that discovered lime juice? You can't replace the vitamin C. It's used up. Don't they say it's got to be continuously replaced? We can't store it. Well, I think there's something about that in enjoyment, pleasure. And so somebody here has talked about family rituals. Absolutely. The rituals, really, the more we do that, they start to become a source of enjoyment. We look forward to them. And then they become anchors for the routines, don't they, that we do things. Old traditional societies have all sorts of anchors. I know I've got a lot of Jewish friends, and Friday night, the whole extended family meets for Shabbat. They have a celebration every Friday night, as long as they get on well together, I guess. But that what an anchor that is. Some traditional Australian families have a roast dinner on the weekend or something. These just opportunities for everyone to get together and enjoy. I think that's a really important notion. So watching the kids and really trying to cater for these activities. How do children and adolescents show this fatigue from stress? They don't show it by saying, gee, I'm tired, but actually they look tired. People who are stressed look tired. Do I see any of your faces looking tired? We need to try and notice that. But of course, if we're too busy, we don't actually look at our children's faces, do we? We just see them. Come on, you need to get your pajamas on, instead of having a look. How are you today? To do this, we've got to try and sort of step out of our this sort of hurly-burly of life and have a good look. They look tired. You often see children with, dark rings and looking pale and so on. These are important signals. If they have had a good night's sleep and they still look tired, then we know we're talking about stress here, and we've got to think about it. Are they carrying worries? They don't go away overnight, do they? Remember that young children's worries and teenagers are often not realistic. They hear us adults talk about our financial problems and whatever else is going on, and they don't ask us a whole lot of questions to understand what it means, but they take it away and worry about it. And then they'll reinterpret it with their own. If you talk to kids, and find out what they think is happening, it's often not the same. So they sort of weave their own imagination in. Kids think imaginatively. The younger they are, the more their imagination is a part of their internal world. And so we've got to really try and make sure that we can't always only talk about things when they're asleep. So we've got to make sure we also say something. Like if we have a conversation together worried about money, then we need to put that in the context for the kids. Yeah, look, Dad and I are worried about the bank loan and whether we'll do this, but it's okay. It'll all work out. We'll still keep our house and we'll still this, that, and the other. Or even if the worst comes to the worst, look, yeah, we probably might not be able to keep our house, but there'll be another house. We'll find another house. We won't have to live under a bridge, because the kids go from, I'm going to lose the world I know, I'm going into the unknown. And they won't know how to talk about that. But as adults, we're saying we're going to lose one option and we're going to have a less satisfactory option that worries us. The kids, it's sort of, they can't see how the world's going to be. So I think we've really got to create the framework that we take for granted as adults and explain it to the children, give them that sense. So therefore, the children are carrying these worries. How do they show it? They become irritable, listless, whining and just sort of can't get on and do anything, don't feel like doing anything, wanting your attention, this boredom. I reckon whenever adolescents say they're bored, they're actually telling us that they're feeling depressed, not in the technical sense, but they're feeling low, they're feeling blue, they're feeling unhappy. But they don't know what it is, they can't put their finger on it. And that unhappiness prevents them from engaging in enjoyable activities. And so they can't get any enjoyment back that will lift their mood. And so there's something about this state of depressive boredom, which means they don't feel they've got any energy to give out, and therefore they can't get any enjoyment back, so they can't change their mood. And I reckon it's a great thing when they come to us adults and say they're bored. I reckon we need to listen to it. But of course, they'll do it when we're stressed and worried and preoccupied and we've got too much to do, won't they? Because they're reacting partly to what's happening to us. And so, they need some external input. They need vitamin P, vitamin parents, parental attention, to give them a bit of a lift. And it never worked for me when my parents said, why don't you go and play with so-and-so? Why don't you do this? Why don't you get your train set out? Why don't you, whatever. I didn't feel like doing anything. Actually, I just needed probably a little bit of love, but we teenage boys don't ask for that sort of stuff, do we? No, you might just need a bit of a conversation. And ideally what you notice then is after a little while, the kids just, have a bit of a conversation and then they'll drift off. And next minute you'll find them doing something in another room. And so they'll also get uncooperative. You ask them to do something. Any kind of chore or work requires a net output of energy because it's not inherently rewarding to take the rubbish bin out, is it? It's something you've got to do. And so they don't want to do it. They put it off. They put off their homework. They lose initiative. They have no sort of output. So I reckon these are all signs. And of course, they can drag us into irritable exchanges and conflict. Well, if you're not going to take the rubbish bin out, I'm not going to cook your dinner. I'll go and get McDonald's then. No, you won't. And pretty soon the whole thing escalates. I think just trying to sort of step back a second and say, okay, it's really difficult. He looks tired. He must be, emotionally tired. What do we do about that? Remember that the ability to play is a really important capacity. Adolescents play too. They, of course, have these addictive games that have so much adrenaline that it sucks them in and holds them. But one of the important things is do they actually maintain these things? With young children, we might see what we call separation anxiety. They don't want to be independent. They want to hang around us. We can see with young children, they become fearful and anxious, of dogs in the street or of noises, just generally feeling ill at ease. Primary school children will show their anxiety in a different way. They're not going to be frightened of dogs in the street necessarily, but they might get apprehensive of nature, loud noises or strong winds, things of that sort. And so there are different ways that kids show these problems as they go through their development. Adolescents, they'll often, particularly older adolescents, will show it by worrying about world events, showing sort of feelings of pessimism and hopelessness about the world. I think it's really important for us to give them space to talk about these things, help them find the words. What's the point? There'll be kids who'll drop out of school because they just don't see the point. I was talking to somebody I'm working with at the moment, a man who grew up in a family where, the way he tells it, he was middle child of a very large family, and no one really had time for him. He didn't ever feel his parents were particularly close or engaged with him. And he describes in that crucial age, around about 15, 16, when kids are old enough and strong enough to have a sense of their own independent capacity, and so they can start making independent decisions, but they don't have any effective long-term perspective on things. It says he remembers he enjoyed poetry, and he remembers being in a particularly boring English lesson, and the way he tells it, the teacher made an absolute boring chore of this poem that he quite enjoyed, and he just thought, this English has got nothing in it for me. And then his next lesson was maths, and he couldn't make any sense of the maths. So he said to himself, I don't see the point of this. And he went home that night and he said to his parents, I don't see any point in school, I'm going to leave. And his mum kind of said, oh, okay, what are you going to do then? And he said, oh, I'll go and get a job. And she said, all right. So he went to school next day and he went round to his teacher and said, thanks very much, I'm leaving. And he left. Now, at this time, he's worried about his teenage boy who's the same age, about 15, and it is giving him a lot of trouble about computer games. His son is saying, you're an idiot. Anyway, I won't go through all the language he gives to his father, but he's, now this father's sort of saying, am I going to lose my son like my parents lost me? And I said, do you ever, sit down and talk to him? Yes, we talk a lot. Do you have affection at times? Yes, we have a lot of fun together. It's just this computer thing that's the problem. Did you ever have that sort of time with your parents? No, I never had any affection with them. I never really talked to them. And I said, well, that's the bedrock of your relationship, the close thing. You've got to just keep helping this kid keep up with his work and not go to bed at 11 o'clock at night, but go to bed at 9 or 10 or whatever, and keep just being hard on him to hold those bare boundaries and be confident that you've got a core of relationship that you didn't have. Because what he really needed is his mum to say, why do you want to do that? What's happening with school? You don't enjoy it. Oh, well, maybe, why don't I go down to school and have a chat with the teachers? Maybe there are different subjects you could do. Get involved with him and help him think about his life and hopefully get some interest from the teachers. And this would be enough to sort of tide him through. And because I think the same thing happens with worldviews, climate change and, political problems and COVID. And we actually need to draw kids' attention to all the good things in life. And We only hear about the bad news, don't we? You know, we hear about one murder, but we don't hear about 300,000 good deeds where people help each other out and their neighbours and everyone. And so this is where we've got to get involved with these kids. Now, I just want to talk a little bit more about what should we do to protect kids and help them through. Somebody's have to leave. We'll be recording this, Ellie, and so you'll be able to get a record of it later. But I wondered if you can just unmute yourself and ask a question, or I'll probably need Angela to read the chat log for me. Sense of control, Neville is raising. Yeah, ask parents to get children's suggestions to what, mate, this is a fantastic idea, isn't it? Engage the children in problem solving. If they're bored.
Yeah, can you hear me, Rob?
Yeah, I can. Good.
Yeah, I guess just I've done it with a few parents. I guess is just to get them just to talk to the kids, just ask what they think they need, get a whole range of different ideas. You know, some have been sort of quite fantastic, but we've managed to sort of whittle them down to some really practical things for the kids. And one family even got the children to write them down in notes and sort of letters, pretty much to sort of, not necessarily to me personally, but just to sort of to write out what they wanted. And then the parents sort of sent me copies of the things that the children had written down that they wanted. So it was just a nice engagement tool, and it just gave the kids a sense of control, because I really do think that sort of control factor is a hugely important sort of dimension. So no matter how small that sort of item of control, I think that's a pretty healing aspect. So that was sort of how I just utilised brokerage in those sorts of ways.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. In fact, I think, getting kids out of the passive role. I don't want to take the rubbish bin out. I've got better things to do. Oh, okay, let's think about how we do the rubbish bin. If I take the rubbish bin out, is there something else you'd rather do? What we need is to work together on this. Really discuss with them. When we get to teenagers, we have to maybe describe the whole context for them, because teenagers have this very simple, self-centered view of the world, which is basically runs according to the program that says, how do I get enough enjoyment out of the next 5 minutes in order to be able to survive the 5 minutes after that? They will often see things a very narrow way. I remember the boy I saw who had opted out of school and, was spending his whole time either asleep or playing computer games in the late afternoon and evening. And he said to me, my mum is so unreasonable. She came home the other day at 3 o'clock after her job, in the middle of winter. She had all her outside clothes on, and here am I about to go to level 5. I've never got to level 5 on my game before. And she comes and starts yelling at me. Only one thing I asked you to do, and that's put the rubbish bin out. Get out there and put it out. I had to go into my wardrobe and find my Ugg boots and put my tracks. I don't change my clothes completely. She was already in her outside clothes. All she had to do is turn around and take it down. It's not far, Now, of course, the mother had a different story, didn't she? So he saw it in this egocentric point of view. And I just think it's so important to sit down and have a conversation about, I do a lot of things for you, don't I? How would it be if I didn't wash your clothes and make your dinner, and just lay it out, engage in this conversation. So what would you like to do to help out in all these things that need to be done? Now, of course, we won't do it when we're feeling tired and irritable and so on. But we can actually say, maybe at a good moment after dinner, well, let's have a talk about how we run the house. And one of the points I was going to make when I talk a bit about family life is maybe developing the habit, and picking up Neville's point of view, of getting the kids to contribute their thoughts. And you could do that at any age at all. As soon as they can start talking, you can ask them what they think and try to build this routine that there will be times when we'll talk about what's going on in the family. We'll talk about the tasks and the problems. We'll have family conferences. If we start that around simple practical things that are of interest to them, what we'll find is that slowly we can sort of draw them into talking about more emotional things as a family, and how people are feeling, and are not always ready to go there straight away.
I think, Rob, Michelle made a comment there saying she gave her children some of the grant money directly so that they could choose what was their priority to replace.
What a great idea. Yeah, that's fantastic. So, you know, there are a lot of implicit messages there, aren't they, about confidence that the kids will be able to think and make decisions, valuing them as individuals and so on. And this is creating a strong sense I'm a valued person just by doing that. These are really important messages. What we do is as much a message as what we say. Now, okay, here's a comment. I was a firefighter and felt safe going to work, but my young son made sense of fires and risk to me through the 6 o'clock news. And only in the recent fires, I saw the effects of PTSD on him as an adult from those young years. Very interesting, isn't it? We know that trauma infiltrates us in all sorts of ways. So in actual fact, you know, it's a very important principle, particularly around the issue of when people are separated, that the children imagine. Children don't just think in concepts, and we don't as adults either. As soon as we get anxious, it stimulates the right part of our brain where we think in pictures. And so we move from concepts in the left side of our brain to images. And the younger we go with childhood, the more important thinking in pictures is, or fantasies, or imagination. And so when, you know, as parents, we might say, geez, I had a frightening trip. I got trapped in the bushfire. Now, what does trapped in the bushfire mean when you make a picture of it? Well, they might mean there was fire, you know, half a kilometre down that way, and there was fire 3 kilometres in the other direction, and there were 25 other cars and 2 fire trucks around where I was, and that fire cleared before that fire caught up. And, you know, if we don't actually portray it graphically, then the child's got, you know, flames licking at the wheels all around and everyone being about to be consumed. And that's a very traumatic image, which will haunt the child. So I think being aware of what the child might make of all sorts of things, you know, I'm thinking about the financial worries that we talk about. And if children are tired and stressed, they don't sleep well, do they? So they wake up when we're having a conversation after they should be asleep, and they hear things. You know, I think it's a good idea to assume that kids do have some sense of whatever's going on in the house, even if they don't know what they know. In other words, they couldn't tell you what's going on, but they have the sense that mum and dad aren't happy, or there's a problem here. So I reckon it's always better to give some controlled communication, and particularly to adolescents. And that means, you know, if we get really irritable or the parents have an argument, to say something about that, to put it in a context. If somebody's talking about family meetings, we'd have family meetings when the kids were younger around the table every few weeks, where everyone could bring up anything bugging them, and we'd work together on looking at a solution. We had a rule that at the end, everyone had to contribute something positive. It might have been a compliment or an account of something pleasant. Really nice. And that becomes a ritual, doesn't it? These are really important issues. Yeah, and Paula is saying young children will create illogical, fantastical explanation for situations. And just before I get on to where we can go with this, is look for how the children might express themselves. The younger, the better. Now, how they express themselves in play, what they notice, what questions they ask. They'll ask them about something they heard on the news or something that somebody else told them. And we can take that as, that's an indication of what's going on in their mind. So if they're asking about disasters, you know, and there's the radio's on in the background and there's some kind of conversation going on, and I don't know, phrase car accident is used, and the kid alerts and says, what's that about? It just all shows you that they're preoccupied with tragedy and threat and danger. And then have a look and see, do they play that out in their games all the time? Do they talk about it with their siblings and so on? And then I'd really say, you know, well, just have a conversation with them about it. Yeah, the news does report this, but remember, most people drive around the place and nothing bad happens. And so we always drive carefully. Do you notice we always drive under the speed limit? You know, explain what you do to keep yourself safe, because they don't really know how we can have a fair bit of control about whether we have accidents, don't we? If houses burn down, well, we've got, let me show you the switchboard we've got and how it's got things to stop the electrical faults burning the house down. And let's talk about the fire preparations we will do for next year and so on. And so we, again, and the moment you're doing that, you're starting to create this opportunity for communication about the problems. And I want to come back to that as a strategy. But I'd like to put down here a note. What should we do? I reckon strategies. Number one, and most important, protect their development. Protect their development. So let me say a couple of words about development. Development unfolds according to a biological timetable. We grow, our brains grow. But amongst that, there is emotional development, personality development, all these different parts of motor development. I've got to actually try myself out and climb trees and ride bikes and do things. I've got to learn to sew and knit and so on. And I can acquire these skills. In development, children are always moving out of a secure, established, stable state into a new, unstable, uncertain, new, different, exciting, adventurous, but possibly hazardous state, whether it's actually learning to make friends, learning to go to scouts or some other thing for the first time. And you need courage, you need energy, you need initiative, you need confidence to do it. Where do you get them from? From the satisfaction, enjoyment, nourishment of the achievements of the previous stage of development, so that you've mastered that. You know, you've had a great time riding your tricycle, and now you see people riding on two-wheelers and you think, I'd really like to learn to do that. And healthy children want to keep moving towards being adults, don't they? Teenagers want to become more and more independent. So we need to understand that development, just like biologically, we need, you know, vitamin D and vitamin C and protein and all the rest of it to develop physically. And in exactly the same way, we need this nourishment and this sense of achievement to wanting to go beyond. And when we're experience high levels of stress, and we can't use our emotional and physical and mental resources for adventuring out into new things, because they're all tied up in coping with the present situation. I just don't have the spare energy. Don't we feel like that as adults too? You know, when we're really struggling and somebody wants to, you know, I don't know, go down the beach or go out, and when we used to go out and have parties or whatever. We haven't done that in Melbourne since before I can remember, but I just don't have the energy to do all that. I just want to do nothing. And the kids are the same. So one of the first effects of extended stress periods is that the kids will tend to not have the resources to continue their development, the participating in their development. But the world around them keeps going. You've got to go up into the next year. You've got to start doing this. You've got to start doing that. And of course, the kids don't feel up to it. And then they start to notice, I'm getting out of step with my peers and I don't feel good. So therefore, one of the absolutely predictable and natural ways of dealing with situation is actually put a bit of a hold on this challenging, exciting movement into the new and the uncertain and the different. So I'm actually going to move back to a stage of development where I was comfortable and I had everything under control, including a state of relationship with my parents where they give me a lot more time and attention and take care of me, and I don't have to be as independent, and they wouldn't dream of asking me something like taking the rubbish bin out. We wouldn't ask them to do that at a certain age. We would ask them to do it a bit later on. But if I go back to that early stage, suddenly I release a lot of pressure and I've got a lot more energy to do the coping and the maintenance of things. Now, moving from one stage of development where you should be back to an earlier stage of development, we call regression. Regression means to go back to an earlier stage. And so if you notice your children either not wanting to, keep moving ahead, but wanting to hang back or even go back to an earlier stage. Now that may mean your teenager doesn't want to hang out with his mates and go riding his BMX over the trail. He doesn't feel like he just wants to hang out and sit around getting under your feet in the kitchen and lick the bowls and, try and eat too many biscuits or something, the way he would have 3 or 4 years ago, or your daughter wants to just sit on your knee and have a story read to her when she hasn't asked for that for a couple of years. I remember once I worked with a family where they had a tragedy, and the daughter, who was probably at the end of secondary school, just couldn't go to sleep, and what they developed, mum and daughter, was they found they went back to the same routine that she had at the end of primary school. She'd get into bed with her and she would want mum to read her childhood favourite books. And they would go through that and they'd even sing the songs that mum used to. It's an extreme case, but this was a really tragic, traumatic event that this family experienced. And this girl regressed right back, and she remained like that for many, many months. And the mother, bless her heart, did it. She just said that I can see she can't do anything else. I'm going to be there for her. And looking back, we could see that was a really nice period of her life where that was exactly what she needed at that early stage. That was a really good experience. So she's gone back to that point to anchor. So that dynamic of regression is an absolutely predictable thing, and we'll do it as adults, don't we? We want our partner to look after us and give us breakfast in bed or something when we're feeling really tired and exhausted. It's a problem when we both need it at the same time, isn't it? But it's regression, emotional regression, where they don't manage their emotions the way they used to. They get irritable. And so I think we just getting that signal, and that may first show up of them not wanting to fulfill their responsibilities or do their chores. So just ask yourself, hang on a second, is this part of a broader picture of regression? Are there other ways? Are they using the language they would have used when they were younger? Are they interested in the activities and occupations that they had when they're younger? And then try to see and say, okay, maybe let's renegotiate the chores I'm asking them to do. And so I think trying to keep your wits about you, because the experience we have when kids come under pressure and they regress is if you allow them to regress and then you feed them vitamin P and everything, attention and interest, and help them enjoy themselves at that regress stage, when they're ready, they will move ahead again. And they will pretty quickly, when things have settled and they've got the energy, they'll want to get back to where they should be by then. And we've seen that, I've seen it academically in children. And in fact, I've noticed that in some of the big research studies they've done in the United States after big hurricanes and so on, great big, large population research projects on children. What they show is that that a risk factor for kids is prohibition of regression. And that is to say, parents are saying, look, just because we've had a bushfire and our house has been burnt down doesn't mean you don't make your bed. Now get on there and make your bed. And as parents, we get worried by regression. We think, what's happening? The kid's losing the plot. I can't let this kid just, relinquish all their responsibilities. So parents become very uncertain about how to work out what this means, and they don't want to just let everything go. And if the child first shows their need to regress by being obstructive and uncooperative, and some kids will do that, then there's a tendency to come in and sort of push them to be responsible. Look, goodness me, you're 15 years old. You're perfectly capable of taking the rubbish. Now get out there and do it. And this, they might do it, but they're surly and uncooperative, and they feel nobody's actually knows what's going on for me, and I don't know how to explain it. I just feel lost and alone. And so try to keep that communication going. What's happening? Don't you want to take the rubbish bin in? Well, what could you do? No? I don't know. Well, we all need to help out. I mean, it's a really tough time. And one of the things I'll talk about again when we talk about the family is trying to develop a sense of, we've got to be a survival unit together as a family. We've got to do this together. We can't do it on our own. We need to, and that's about communication. We need to the biggest resource we've got is each other. And how do we actually come on? What would you like to do? Let's work out how that works. So allow regression. Now, there'll be some kids who will take advantage of things and exploit the opportunity, but you'll probably know that because that was a tendency of theirs before. So I say, if what's showing up with your children isn't consistent with how they were before, it's going to be about the disaster and the stress situation of the moment. So don't worry about continuing to make sure they grow up as a healthy, law-abiding, morally appropriate, civilized human being. If they were like that before they hit this stress, it's going to be all right. You've done the important work. And so let them regress, give them some leeway, just nurture them, just try to shepherd them through. If they're being obstructive and difficult and defiant, they're young adolescents, don't have a huge power struggle about it. Just think, okay, this is how they're expressing it. And it's often the case, that when kids are really scared, they can't bear to go into the weakness of being scared. Anxious, anxiety. Anxiety is a weakening state, isn't it? It sort of diffuses us and pulls us apart. And there's a fundamental dimension that we talk about in child and adolescent mental health, which is identifiable really almost from birth, and they call it temperament. There's a sort of an inbuilt style that we all have. And you can divide it up between internalizers and externalizers. Internalizers sort of have a very rich and extensive internal world, They think about things, and these are the kids that have got all sorts of ideas going on in their heads. These are the kids that will probably sit down even as preschool kids, and they'll occupy themselves, and they'll draw pictures of all sorts of dinosaurs eating whatever, and crocodiles and all sorts of stuff, and it'll all be drawn out there, and they'll be having a very happy time. And then there'll be the externalizers, who are the outward-going, adventurous, action-oriented kids. The kids who are on the go all the time, and whereas the internalizers will express their anxiety as an internal state. I'm worried, I'm scared, what's that noise, and I can't sleep, and tell me stories about crocodiles and dinosaurs. I'm obsessed with these things because they're in my mind, I want to see them. Whereas the other externalizers will be out there climbing trees and falling off them, and having fights with their siblings, and putting their anxiety out there. They're running, you could say, running away from their anxiety, turning the energy of anxiety into maybe conflicts. Some kids have told me when they've got learning problems at school, that it's much better when I can't do something to pick a fight and get kicked out by the teacher and have to go and sit for a while in the principal's office than to sit there and have to bear the humiliation of not being able to do something that everyone else can do. And so it's a deliberate ploy. For them, the most threatening thing is this sense of self that they don't have a strong internal feeling about. What they're not so frightened about is external conflict, whereas the internalizer is going to be devastated if they get kicked out of a class. So that's a terrible trauma. And the shame of having to go to the principal is terrible. Whereas the externalizer is not worried about it. In fact, the principal will probably be nice to him. Didn't happen in my day. We got the cane, so we're too scared to do it, but that's another story. But to create an environment where we can actually keep track of the children's responses, and when we've got that externalizing kid who's being very difficult, often the best trick is treat them as though they're anxious, right? They're being obnoxious, trying to prick a fight with you, instead of saying, "Don't you talk to me like that," brackets, "I'm responsible for turning you into a law-abiding, civilized human being. I better get onto it now and really come down heavy on you because you seem to be going off the rails. You've done so well up to now, and I'm really worried about whether you're going to turn out all right or not, so I'm going to come heavy on you." Instead of doing that, and you'll find out quickly if that's not working, because they'll arc up, or they'll just go into their room and slam the door and not say anything for a long time. Put their earphones on, don't they? And you go there and knock tentatively. Is he all right? Go away and leave me alone. So instead of going down that track, you can say, "Hey, hang on. Wait a second. What's wrong? Are you upset about something? Are you worried about something?" No. Oh, wait a second. You're not normally like this. There must be something on your mind. And then you think of the most obvious thing you can think of. Are you worried about Dad and I had an argument last night, about finances and stuff? Or, and sometimes, well, what are you going to do? Which means, you've hit the bullseye. And you say, "Oh, well, okay, let's have a chat. We can't do it now. What about after dinner? I'll get Dad and we'll explain to you what's going on here." It's just teenage boys. And, or if you're wrong, that's just as helpful, because I say, "No, of course I'm not worried about that." "So what are you worried?" "Well, I'm worried." And then anything that gets the conversation going. You don't have to be right. You just have to be, in fact, it's probably good for them if you're stupid, and then they'll actually correct you. And you're drawing them out, and getting the conversation going. in that way, you'll start to get this sense. And so you can try to put this picture and try and put the picture together. And that's where I think it's really helpful in the family, in the relationship with anyone else who's engaged in the child's life. Just try and sit back every now and again, have a talk about them and the patterns, what everyone's noticing, put it together and try to see it as a picture. How are they going? Are they up to where they were before? Have they regressed? Is that going on at school? And what could be happening in the family? Is there ways of doing with it? Just this active thinking process. So one strategy is protect development, and that is observe how it maybe stalls or regresses. And so then what can we do? We can actually set out to nourish development, which means try to quarantine them for what they can't manage, for what's not their responsibility. Try and be just a little bit more careful about when you have conversations about complex issues that they're not going to really be able to participate in, which means a bit of self-discipline on the part of parents. Look to energy, sleep, food, routine, exercise, all those very, very simple things. And then the energy, that unique energy that comes from play and joy and achievement. Do you remember how happy you felt to complete a model, plastic model, or I don't know, girls making something, a dress or something, and this sense of achievement, of having done something productive, planted some seeds in the garden and see the lettuces come up. Try to, I don't know, let's call it vitamin A, achievement, to create a situation where the kids can actually achieve something creative. That'll give them energy. Play is for children what work is for adults, because play isn't just fun, it's incredible, potent learning process. That play for particularly young children is rehearsing the adult world, is learning to manage materials. And then social play is learning to manage relationships in a space where it doesn't matter too much if it goes wrong. Sort of learning to use the mind, learning to think, learning to follow rules, learning the value of cooperating with other people to a sense of rules. When children regress, they regress out of that and they can't take it that they don't win the card game. And they've got to really move from that self-centered satisfaction of I win every time to the much more subtle but satisfying satisfaction of, as a group, we have a game, someone different wins every time, but everyone's enjoying themselves for a whole afternoon playing cards. That's a very different experience. So these are the things that I think get lost when we're all living a stressed lifestyle and we all don't have enough energy. Children learn, practice, develop their cognitive and mental capacity through play. And then we nourish development socially through exposing them to peers. So if you're in the lockdown situation, it often might need adults to facilitate kids to make phone calls. They're all on social media now anyway, aren't they? But if they're not, encourage them to actually connect not just with their best friend, but with maybe wider networks. So they get this sense of I'm still part of a group. And just hanging out in the family. It's going to be hard when there's too much to do, isn't it? But just value those times of just doing nothing, just milling, just hanging out, chatting, because that's what gives us a sense of belonging, doesn't it? We're together. I'm accepted here. We belong together. We've got a bit of a family life. Tell a few jokes, reminisce about the past. I think that in addition to the important strategies that you can read in all sorts of places online and so on, handouts, I'd be saying, just be together and see what happens. And if you like, the nurturance, vitamin P, is just try to give your children your full attention as regularly as you can. Nothing else, just your full attention and see what happens. Whereas I think often nowadays parents feel they have to come up with solutions and so on. And when children talk to us and cry and tell us about their problems and we don't know what to do about it. I'm supposed to be a psychologist. I don't know what to do about my kids' problems often either. And you sit there and they cry about it, and you listen to them and you talk about it. And I'll tell you what my secret weapon is. Now, why don't you let me think about that, and we'll talk about it again tomorrow, and just sleep on it. And when you're a bit more settled, we'll probably think of something. And probably you do think of something too. But it's often that conversation that changes everyone's perspective. And nourish communication in any way you can, because that's where the child gets out of being alone. And try to build it as a normal expectation. It is the greatest source of energy. It's good, a good conversation, isn't it? Good exchange. So what does communication give to kids? It gives them the stimulus to actually put into words. And when we put things into words, just think about what we have to do. We have to explain. We've got to put one sentence after another. We've got to make sense. So that means we must sort it out in my mind in order to convey it. And that means I'm changing it in my mind. And it takes energy to communicate. So I'm releasing some of the energy. I'm actually clarifying things. And, I used to work with seriously multiply handicapped children and in a residential setting. And they're often very confusing. And what we would find is when we had kids with really severe behaviour problems, if the staff group just sat down and we all shared what we knew about the child in a respectful, thoughtful way, trying to understand them, none of us had an answer, but we all shared, you develop this sort of picture of the child that everyone would learn something, often from each other. And blow me down, what would happen is 9 times out of 10, the child would change already as soon as we started interacting, because somehow we were all bringing a much more thoughtful, sensitive awareness of that child to meet them. And when we understand somebody, they sense that they're understood. And that is a sort of a bit of chemistry that actually creates an opportunity. And I think it's really important for the parents to do that together. It's really important in separated families, if you can, to have times where you can at least share your observation of the children so you can get a common picture. What children need is to be surrounded by people who have a common picture of them, a common feeling about them, understand them. It doesn't have to be detailed, but just you've got a sense of where he or she is. And then as part of that, you encourage them to participate in this communication process, because communication connects. And connecting means I'm not alone. And when I'm not alone, I'm receiving energy. It's like an arc, electrical arc. If I feel in communication, I get energy back. It also gives children perspective that takes them out of their own little world. And that's often, as the kids get older, they don't want to talk too much. So don't try and do it all at once. Don't opt for an adult organised conversation that identifies a problem, elaborates it, comes to solutions, comes up with a plan. Often kids aren't ready to do that. If you just watch them, I've spent many years talking with kids with all sorts of problems, And what I actually learned is quit while you're ahead. Because if you talk for too long, all of a sudden they'll start looking around the room, or they'll look at their watch, and you know you've lost them. They're not really listening. Maybe you've touched on something that they start to feel uncomfortable about. It was a relief to say it, but I don't want to say too much about it. Or, okay, I've got one idea, but that's enough. I'm over it. And what I learned was you don't lose anything by quitting there and just having, a bit of a casual conversation about whatever they're interested in. You've done the work. They feel somebody gets it. And if we can do that with our own kids, I remember mine when they were adolescents. You pick that moment where they've lost concentration, or they start asking another question like, what are we having for dinner, or something like that. And you feel like saying, well, hang on a second, we're in the middle of a serious conversation here. No, they're actually saying, I've got something to think about, Mum, that'll be enough. We can just do it in little snatches. So it's not according to our timing, it's their timing that makes sense. And so just nurturing this communication in a fragmentary way, and you'll find that as they get older in adolescence and they start to enjoy communication, they will start to talk longer. So into that, we can make mention of their fears, their worries, and help them hang on to the things we know are really essential resilience factors, which is optimism, feeling that you can take an active hand in your own life situation. You can make decisions. You can make decisions about how you feel, that you can actually realize that you're feeling pessimistic and unhappy, and you can actually ask for a conversation. You can ask, Mum, what's the point of life? And then you have a conversation about optimism. That even as adults, when we're feeling bleak and pessimistic and can't see the way out of it, we should know that there's a whole range of options there. There's a whole range of supports and services, both formal and informal, that will mean that what the research shows is most people can get through disasters and come out the other side living good lives. It's hard work, takes a long time, and we can't do it alone, but we can get there. And this is the sense we have to give kids, that kids can't see that perspective. And we have to try and show them this perspective. If they're really upset about the bush that they loved, when we can travel around, take them to Cockatoo or other places that have had bushfires years ago, and show them how it regenerates. That was something that the whole communities got depressed when the Black Saturday bush didn't regenerate for years. And I remember one community organised a biologist to come and walk them through the bush and show them how it would regeneration and the first signs that, unless you were trained, you didn't see. And of course it does regenerate. So we need to move out of our concrete experience to have ideas about the future and survival and so on. Like, we'll survive a COVID. Somebody said the other day, the one thing that all pandemics have in common, and there have been many of them in recorded history, is they eventually come to an end. It might be a few months, maybe it'll be a few years. It took, 3 years for the 1918 flu to subside, but it did. And we didn't know about pandemics for a long time, did we? Unless you lived somewhere where they had MERS and SARS and stuff. But, so then it becomes, how do we endure? How do we actually marshal ourselves and our resources to actually get through to that point? And the dangerous thing is we lose track of that sense that there is a future and there is a goal. And then kids will start to wonder, what's the point of it all? And we know that that's one of the things that kids can come out of disaster experiences with, is this sense of, pessimism about the future. And we want to help them hang in there and have faith in the future, but they'll have to get that from us. Now, I do want to say a couple of things about family life, but I just wondered whether anyone's got any thoughts or questions. Whether we've got anything in the chat box. If a parent is running on empty, would you suggest that mum or dad also seek out their friendships and supports that they can, so that they can parent in this environment as well? Absolutely. And as parents, we need vitamin P. We need attention, don't we? And maybe we can get it from our parents. Unfortunately, not all adults get on well with their parents, but who do we enjoy contact with? And cultivate those friendships, and try not to just talk about your problems with them, because that can wear people out. Try to have some fun with them, reminiscing. How can they develop a sense of self? Self is a really important thing. This is one of the developmental processes we need to nurture. I get a sense of self by being treated as a self, right? We can't, it's just, all our relationships are like a mirror. You know, you can't work out what shape your nose is unless you look in a mirror, aren't you? Right? Well, so we don't know who we are unless we get feedback, unless we get attention. And the feedback's got to be about us. And so I think it's really helpful to create opportunities to be able to express themselves and have us talk to them. Don't hesitate to tell them what you might otherwise take for granted, which might be, you might want to say to them, look, you know, you are speaking to me a bit rudely, and that hurts my feelings a bit. But you know, the thing I really enjoyed being with you before the fires was you always would be really nice to me and always helped. So that tells me that you're a really nice kid, and that you're feeling a bit irritable and bad-tempered like all of us at the moment. You know, it's sort of that's where you actually are helping the child realise what you hold about them. And like the man I spoke about, who, you know, had an unnurturing childhood, and he didn't realise that he was loved. He didn't feel loved. But he does love his kids, and he's nurtured affection. He made a decision to do his fathering differently. So when he hits adolescence, which was a difficult time with his teenagers, he sort of, I didn't know how to, nobody showed me how to be the father. My father didn't father me, and so I'm not quite sure how to do it. But he's got the groundwork there. Well, it's very helpful for him to have someone like me point that out, but he could have a friend, couldn't he? Who could point that out if he had the right conversation. So yes, we all need to have who we are and what we are fed back to us. Somebody's, Antona has said last time I spoke during Black Saturday about children holding the load while parents were in turmoil. And when the parents started to recover, we started seeing children's behaviour deteriorating. Yes, so this comes back to the idea of coping that I spoke about to begin with. You know, many children, you know, this is part of the 80% kids. So some kids won't be able to hold it, and they won't be able to avoid presenting problems of various sorts: anxiety, panic attacks, behavioural problems, depression, whatever. But the 80%, most kids will just try to bog in and do what's required. And a lot of parents would say, and our kids have been fantastic. They've been so helpful. And they can see, you know, how hard we're doing it. They know if we are close to tears, or they know if we, go into the bedroom and close the door for a while and come out with slightly red-rimmed eyes. But they don't say anything, of course, unless we give them permission, which we can do by saying, sorry, I've just been having a bit of a cry. I'm feeling better now. And I'm going to cook you a lovely dinner, right? It can be as simple as that. And the kids suddenly realise, oh, okay, mum's bigger than her sadness. Or dad loses his temper and says, sorry, I know I lost my temper just now or yesterday or last week, whenever you get it together. But we're going to have a really lovely weekend. So that allows the kids to put it into perspective. But I think coming back to this point, so many kids will hold it in as long as they feel that things are uncertain and insecure. And then so often when the house was built, they'd all moved in, they'd all settled, and you suddenly get the kids, they're over it. That's maybe when they would regress. They've been, I call it precociously responsible. Precocious meaning before your time. A precocious child is a child who acts like an adult. So we have this idea of somebody developing precocious responsibility. It's okay, Mum, I'll cook the dinner. I'll do this, that, and the other. That's something to watch out for. The loss of roles and structure in the family, where children will step up and take more responsibility, which is then tempting for the parents to step down and regress to being looked after by their kids. And so you've got a role reversal, haven't you? And so in subtle ways, kids will step into holes in the family routine and try and help out. And so then when everyone's moving back to their roles, there can be quite some friction. Because if you've been taking undue responsibility for things, and suddenly mum starts to, or dad starts to treat you as though you're a child again, you might object to it, mightn't you? I don't want to be told what to do. The way around that is to negotiate. Aren't things different now we've moved into our new house? And so don't be surprised. Again, it's part of the whole cycle. I call that recovery from recovery. You know, the recovery period is a lengthy, to really get through it all and to establish a new lifestyle, really long and difficult time where a lot of things are going to be different, and there can be a lot of adjustments that we won't keep track of. And when we come out and we establish the life we want, once again, there's going to be a whole lot of periods where there are going to be some frictions and difficulties as we adjust. Expressing emotions is important, but we have to give children permission to do the same. I see the point Delia's saying is that when we express our emotions and talk about it, we actually also encourage the children to express their emotions. Children sometimes just need to have a good cry, don't they? Teenagers will be angry and upset for a while, and it's just so, teenagers have told me they're so grateful their parents don't take it personally when they go through a long and difficult period. I just know there are a lot more questions there, but I just wanted to make a few comments about family life. I talked about the loss of structures and roles and this business of coping and compromising, trying to get through as best we can. There's a tendency to, along with the loss of routines, and we're just improvising a day-by-day coping, we lose boundaries. Boundaries is this term we use to show where one thing ends and another thing starts. And boundaries might be when you go to bed. That's what the person I'm working with is working on with his game-playing son, the boundary of going to bed. He made the mistake of negotiating with his son that his son would turn his computer game off and go to bed at 10 o'clock. and he comes back at 11 and he's still totally immersed in his computer game. And then they get sidetracked into an argument. You said you were going to turn it off at 9:30. Oh yeah, but this thing happened in the game, and I just had, and then he'll distract him with this long justification of why on this occasion it was absolutely essential that he kept playing. You just lose all your power when you try to argue with that, because the teenagers have got this. They've just discovered logic, and they can run rings around us because they're only running rings around us on this little issue. That's where boundaries are. No, we made an agreement, so that means blah, 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 consequences. And then, of course, you have to stand behind it. So that means I'm going to come at 9:30 and watch you turn your computer game off. I'm going to have to do that because obviously you're not able to do it yourself. When you can show me you can do it, blah, blah, blah. So that's just setting these firm boundaries and not worrying about how much upset you cause, because you've negotiated and they've agreed on it. They just can't do it. But boundaries about privacy, boundaries about roles and activities, boundaries around what we expect about independence, what are people's responsibilities. And you find that when the boundaries are established tightly, I don't mean tightly, but when they're established by negotiation and then held by the parents, even though the teenagers and even young children will become difficult and object to it, overall their anxiety will settle. That clarity of that firm, clear-cut, mutually agreed set of arrangements provides an enormous amount of security for all of us. So therefore, think about that in just preserving the structure of life. And so if you're in improvised situations, stop and think about how can we shape routines. This is something that I think we've all had to do on the various forms of isolation. We've had to rebuild routines. And if we repeat routines regularly, they become self-sustaining. Just a couple of other points is beware of, when boundaries are not clear, emotional contagion. So a boundary might be that the parents talk about some things in front of the kids, but not others. They talk about them, more, parental or adult worries and concerns. I'll do that in privacy. We don't need to share it all with the kids. Doesn't mean we're keeping secrets. There's a difference between privacy and secrecy, isn't there? Privacy is what belongs to us. And we might keep the kids informed, but we don't have to share all the ins and outs of it. And so preserving that sense of boundaries means that not everything flows into everybody. And I think this is one of the big problems in disaster-affected communities, when everyone's in this highly aroused state. But it occurs in any stressed group, a work group that's under a lot of stress. People start to lose the boundaries of how they manage their emotions. They let stuff fall out. They make a communication in an emotional way rather than actually communicating the ideas. And so what's being communicated fundamentally is the emotion rather than the task or the responsibility that we have to take. And so that emotional contagion means it doesn't matter what the emotion is, it's sort of going through everybody. I think that's a bit like not washing our hands, and we all start to pick up each other's infections. So actually, COVID's all about boundaries, isn't it? And not contagion. So I think we need a certain amount of boundary and non-contagion in our emotional life. We need to communicate the emotions in a thoughtful, constructive way. Now we can't always do it. That means afterwards we've got to clean up if we've dropped our bundle and yelled at the kids or had an argument with our partner or whatever. We've got to say something about it to create the context. It's okay, Mummy and I love each other. We're just all very tired and upset. and then say something nice. But we're going to get through this and whatever. You know, it's been shown that even when people feel really pessimistic and it appears to be hopeless, if the leading people maintain optimism, even if they don't believe it, that is enormously supportive for the optimism of everyone else. I read this paper on a shipwrecked crew who were in a lifeboat in a remote part of the Southern Ocean, in such a place that they probably were never going to be found. And the captain knew all the navigational thing, that they were off all the sea lanes and they would almost certainly never be found. And I think they were there for weeks or something. And he just kept saying, no, it'll be right, someone will come. And he told them, he just maintained this optimistic view all the time. And when they were almost dead, they were found and they were brought back and they put in hospital down in Hobart it was. And as they started to be capable of talking, they thought, what an incredible story. So they got some researchers to interview them. And what the crew said is, no, we never gave up hope because the captain said we'd be found, and we knew he was a good captain, and we knew that if he said we're going to be found, we're going to be found. And so we were just waiting. And when they talked to the captain, he said, no, I didn't have any expectation we'd ever be found, but I thought I'd better try and keep the crew's spirit up. You know, it's a really interesting, this is what we see in the research into resilient people. They can hold on to things that allow them to have a sense that they will get through this, which means there's something about time, of being, I'm in a bad time, in a difficult time. We're all struggling, but it's only a difficult time. We can look back to a period where things were better. And if that was there, we'll get to another period. We don't know how or when, but we'll get there. And we've got to hang on to that with COVID. Now, we can't hold that all by ourselves all the time. And that's where we have to, when one person leaves the plot, somebody else has got to hold the optimism. And so all of this inhibits the emotional contagion of things like anger, anxiety, despondency, or cynicism. I think they're poisonous, and we've got to try and hold them back. I mentioned about seeing the family as developing it as a refuge rather than the source of stress. We're in this together. Develop this sort of group awareness. And I think anything like somebody's mentioned, getting this family together and have this communication about how we're getting through this. You know, I mentioned just giving time where you can give full attention to each other, the parents and the kids. Encourage the kids to just listen to each other. Their little brother might drive them mad, but just listen to them. It really means a lot to them. And as part of that, I think just making an agreement to hold on to standards of behaviour, manners, etiquette, respect, dignity, these fundamental values, because when we're all irritable and bad temper, we swear too much, we yell, we be impatient, we think because we're all stressed, I shouldn't have to hold my language. Sometimes we lose it. But if we realise that the function of these social forms is to actually allow for social interaction not to be a constant friction. You know, I sometimes talk about people living in bushfire communities being skinless. You know, we lose the outer layer of our skin, and every touch is not a touch but a pain because we're too raw and too sensitive. That's what we're like when everything is so stressed and we're tired and all the issues that we've got. And what creates, you know, we might take a while to grow the skin over, but if we put a little bit of oil over it, you know, then when I rub one surface against another, the oil just allows it to slide, doesn't it? And the oil is this, the way the manners and the respect and the dignity and I think we can model that with our own kids because, if we yell at kids, they might learn on one hand, don't do that because Dad will yell at us. But what they're also learning is if someone's doing something that annoys you, you yell at them. That's what you're supposed to do. And so when my little brother does something to me, and I don't know, I'm going to yell at them. And everyone starts yelling and so on. So it's a very simple thing. Just encourage everyone, pull each other up, not punishing, but hey, hang on, can you just ask me nicely? Or can you say please or thank you or whatever. They hold a structure for us. And this, what a resource we've got in each other to help if we all commit to help each other. We're not doing it alone. We've got however many people in the family to help us, haven't we? If we're doing it alone, we've only got ourselves. And the other point I was going to make is about nurturing family conversations and conferences, but we've already talked about that. But perhaps in the last few minutes, let's see if anyone's got any comments or thoughts.
Yes, Rob, can I just give you a little observation that
Yeah.
I was very interested. One parent was talking to me about their daughter, primary school, after the fires, went through the fires very traumatically. The little girl had a ritual every afternoon, would go and get a bucket of water and some soil and make mud pies. Just by herself. She was fine at school, fine with the kids. And she did that for about 4 months. Every afternoon would just make those pies, and that seemed to just calm her down. And she would then go back into the family situation. And I just found that was quite interesting, that was her way of perhaps coping or some sort of ritual that she only stopped it about a month ago.
What age is she, Campbell?
She was about 7.
So my thought there is that I bet she had a happy kindergarten time.
She did?
Yeah, because that's the sort of thing that kids do in kinder, don't they?
Yeah.
And I think she's showing, I'm going back to a time that was really happy and I felt things were under control and I was on top of things. And, I remember the enjoyment of mud pies. And so she's nurtured herself, hasn't she? She's nourished herself with that, drawing on that part of her life. Yeah, lovely story. Yeah, and she did it for quite a few months, and now she's ready to move. Yeah,
She's moved on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And someone says how lovely she was allowed the space to do that. I just think it's so important to let kids guide us. Sometimes they need us to guide them, but we need to keep learning about them. That's one other thing I would say is when you're worried about your kids or you don't understand what's going on, just talk about it together, compare notes, and then with anyone else who knows the child, and just get their point of view. We can do a lot better thinking together. Any other thoughts? Delia saying, so often parents feel they have to hop in and fix. That's right. That's our anxiety, isn't it? Most of the time, we probably can't fix things by just doing something. We need to just slowly massage it away. Just keep working on it. Allow yourself time. And where I think we need to be active and get onto things is where we can see a child was struggling with certain issues before and they're worse now. But where a child was sort of managing things before, but they seem to have kind of lost the plot a bit, I think we should just realise that that's the core that was there and let that come through. Look, there are many other aspects that we could talk about. And, you know, every comment I'm making, I'm thinking of half a dozen other things we could talk about. I'm sure there'll be a lot of other questions. But can I encourage you to, you know, feed in your questions in whatever ways you can of what sort of themes that you would find it helpful for us to provide more support about, more input, whether are particular problem areas that we could actually discuss. What I've tried to do today is to, you know, sort of sketch the big picture and hang on to the fundamentals of development, and to ensure that we can keep our focus on that rather than getting too caught up in the cookbook approach of trying to, you know, find solutions to all the problems. We've got to create this, you know, management of the whole environment of the child's development, and I think that really sorts a lot of problems out. But thanks, really, you've been very, very, what should we say, enduring. Give me 2 hours of your time. Thank you very much. I hope that's been helpful.